My parents secretly saddled me with $135,000 debt to fund my brother's wild dreams. But I refused, and Phoenix summers are no joke, and in my cramped one-bedroom apartment, the air conditioning worked overtime trying to keep me from melting. I'd just come home from my internship, exhausted but proud. At 24, I was finally starting to feel like I was on the right track. College was behind me, and the late nights of cramming and coffee-fueled panic attacks had paid off. My diploma hung on the wall, a symbol of everything I had pushed through to get here. My phone buzzed on the desk, an email notification. I was too tired to check it immediately, assuming it was some generic message from the bank, maybe a reminder about my next student loan payment. It wasn't until I sat down with a reheated slice of pizza and clicked open the email that my world tilted. Dear Mr. Taylor, your outstanding loan balance is $135,000. Your next payment is due. I stopped reading. My chest tightened, and my eyes locked on the number. It didn't make sense. I knew exactly how much my college tuition had been. $50,000. My partial scholarship had knocked $20,000 off that, and I'd worked part-time to cover the rest. The numbers didn't add up, no matter how I looked at them. I refreshed the email, half hoping it would disappear. No luck. Panic set in as I scrambled to open my loan account online. The figure was there, staring back at me like a threat. $135,000. My heart pounded, and I tried to piece it together. Had there been some kind of mistake? A technical glitch? A typo? As my mind raced, I found myself dialing my mom's number. The one person who always seemed to have an answer. Hi, sweetie. Mom answered, her voice bright and cheerful. I could hear the sound of a TV in the background, some cooking show she loved to watch. Mom, I just got an email from the bank, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. They're saying I owe $135,000 in student loans. That can't be right. There was a pause. Not the concerned, attentive kind of pause you expect from a parent, but the kind that made my stomach drop. She said casually, that doesn't sound right. Are you sure it's not a mistake? I checked the account. It's real, Mom. What's going on? Did you or Dad do something with my loans? Oh, honey, she said, brushing it off. Don't stress. It's probably just a mix-up. We'll sort it out. Her words were meant to be reassuring, but they only made me more suspicious. My parents weren't the type to be careless with money, but they also weren't the type to fully explain things either. Mom, I need you to be honest with me, I pressed. Did you and Dad take out more money than I needed for school? Like, the full amount of the loans? Another pause. This one longer, heavier. I could practically hear the gears turning in her head as she tried to decide what to say. Well, she finally admitted, her tone quieter now, we might have taken out the full amount, just to make sure you had enough, in case your scholarship didn't cover everything. What? My voice rose before I could stop it. Mom, my scholarship covered most of my tuition, and I've been working to cover the rest. Why would you take out more than I needed? Her hesitation was answer enough. But when she spoke again, her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Well, your brother needed some help too. Ryan, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. What does Ryan have to do with my student loans? Sweetie, she said, her tone shifting into that patronizing register I'd always hated. Ryan's been struggling with his music career. He needed a little financial support, and we thought it was only fair to help him out too. My head was spinning. Ryan, my 28-year-old brother, had dropped out of college years ago to chase his dream of becoming a musician. I'd always supported him, cheered him on from the sidelines, even when he moved back home after his third failed gig tour. But this? Mom, you're telling me you took out extra money in my name and gave it to Ryan? It's not as bad as it sounds, she said quickly. We were just trying to give both of you the best chance to succeed. We didn't think it would be a big deal. Not a big deal. My voice cracked. It's $135,000, Mom. I'm 24. I just started working. How am I supposed to pay this off? We'll figure it out, she said, brushing me off again. Don't stress yourself over it. We'll talk more about this later. But I couldn't wait for later. The weight of what she just admitted was too much. Without saying goodbye, I hung up and slammed my phone on the desk. My hands were shaking, and I couldn't stop the rising tide of anger and disbelief. They had taken out $135,000 in my name, without telling me. And for what? So my brother could blow it on studio time and road trips while I was scraping by, working late shifts at a diner to make ends meet? I stared at the email again, the number glaring at me like a prison sentence. This wasn't just a mistake. It was betrayal. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that number. I thought about Ryan, about my parents, about how they could have done this to me without so much as a conversation. By morning, I knew one thing for sure. I needed answers, and I needed them now. I grabbed my car keys and headed for my parents' house. If they thought they could sweep this under the rug, they were wrong. This was my future on the line, and I wasn't going to let it slip away without a fight. I pulled into the driveway of my parents' suburban home in the heart of Phoenix, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of place where people watered their lawns at the crack of dawn and waved at every passing car. It was the last place you'd expect to find this kind of chaos brewing. I slammed the car door shut and marched to the front door. My stomach churned with a mix of anger and anxiety, but I pushed it down. This wasn't the time for hesitation. I needed answers. The door swung open before I even knocked. My mom stood there, her face a mix of guilt and nervousness. She always had a way of acting like everything was fine, but her eyes gave her away. "Alex, honey, I wasn't expecting you so early," she said, forcing a smile. "We need to talk," I said, pushing past her into the house. The living room looked exactly as it always had. The same beige couch, the same family photos on the wall, the same faint smell of my mom's lavender-scented candles. It all felt so normal, which only made me angrier. My dad was in his recliner, flipping through the channels on the TV. He looked up, surprised to see me, but didn't say a word. My older brother Ryan was sprawled out on the couch, strumming his acoustic guitar and humming some tune under his breath. "Ryan," I said, my voice sharp enough to cut through the air. He looked up, confused. "What's up, little bro?" I ignored him and turned to my parents. "We need to talk. Now." My dad muted the TV and sighed, leaning back in his chair like this was some kind of inconvenience. "What's this about?" I clenched my fists to keep from losing it right there. "It's about the $135,000 in student loans you took out in my name, and the $70,000 of it that went to Ryan." Ryan stopped strumming his guitar and stared at me, wide-eyed. "Wait, what?" "Don't play dumb," I snapped. "Mom already told me. The bank says I owe $135,000. That's way more than my tuition. She said you used some of the loan for Ryan." My mom winced like I just hit her. My dad frowned, shaking his head. "Look, Alex, we were just trying to help you both out. It wasn't supposed to be a big deal." "A big deal?" My voice cracked, rising despite my effort to stay calm. "You put me in six-figure debt without even telling me. How is that not a big deal?" My mom wrung her hands, avoiding eye contact. "We didn't think it would turn out like this. We just wanted to make sure Ryan had a chance to succeed, too. Ryan didn't even go to college," I shouted, pointing at him. "He's been sitting around playing his guitar and crashing at your place while I busted my ass working and studying. And you think it's fair to dump this on me?" Ryan finally spoke up, his voice defensive. "Hey, don't drag me into this. I didn't ask them to do that. Are you kidding me?" I snapped. "You didn't say no, either. Did you even ask where the money was coming from when they handed it to you?" Ryan shrugged, avoiding my glare. "I just thought they were helping me out, man. I didn't think it was a big deal." "Not a big deal," I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. "Of course, it's not a big deal for you. You're not the one paying it back." My dad stood up, his face stern. "Alex, enough. We did this for the family. Ryan needed help, and we thought you'd understand." "Understand?" I said, my voice shaking. "You've got to be kidding me. You didn't even bother to tell me. You just went behind my back and signed me up for a lifetime of debt. How am I supposed to understand that?" My mom started to cry, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "We didn't mean to hurt you, Alex. We thought we were doing the right thing." "The right thing?" I shouted. "You've completely screwed me over. I worked so hard to get through college, to do everything the right way, and now I'm starting my career buried under a mountain of debt that isn't even mine. My dad stepped closer, his voice rising. Don't take that tone with your mother. We always tried to do what's best for you kids. Yeah, I said, meeting his glare. Because it sure doesn't feel like it. It feels like I'm just the backup plan when Ryan's dreams don't pan out. Ryan stood up now, his face red. You don't know what you're talking about, Alex. I've been working my ass off, trying to make it in the music industry. You think it's easy? You're right, Ryan. I don't know what it's like, I said, my voice cold. Because I've been too busy paying for my own life instead of mooching off mom and dad. Ryan's jaw tightened, but he didn't say anything. I turned back to my parents. I want to know exactly how much of this loan went to Ryan and why you didn't take it out in his name. He's 28, for God's sake. He's old enough to deal with his own finances. My mom sniffled, her voice barely above a whisper. He didn't have the credit or the grades to qualify for a loan. We didn't have any other options. I let out a bitter laugh. So, you thought, hey, let's just dump it on Alex. He'll figure it out. That's not what we thought, my dad said, his tone defensive. Then what did you think? I said, my voice rising again. That I'd just roll over and accept it? That I wouldn't notice? The room fell silent. My mom looked at the floor, my dad stared at me like I was the problem, and Ryan crossed his arms, refusing to engage. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice steady despite the anger boiling inside me. I'm not paying back a single cent of that $70,000 you gave to Ryan. You figure out how to fix this, or I'll take legal action. I don't care what it does to this family. I'm done being the scapegoat. I didn't wait for a response. I grabbed my keys and walked out, slamming the door behind me. As I drove away, my hands trembled on the steering wheel. Part of me felt guilty for how harsh I'd been, but the other part knew I had no choice. This wasn't just about the money. It was about trust, respect, and the years of resentment I'd been pushing down. For the first time in my life, I wasn't going to let them walk all over me. This time, I was standing up for myself, no matter what it cost. Driving back to my apartment after that showdown with my parents, my anger was like a slow burn in my chest. I couldn't stop replaying the conversation in my head. My dad's dismissive tone, my mom's tears, and Ryan's indifference. It all swirled together like a storm I couldn't escape. When I got home, I collapsed onto the couch, my mind racing. I was angry, sure, but underneath that was a raw sense of betrayal. They were my family. They were supposed to protect me, not set me up to fail. I stayed up that night, researching everything I could about loans, legal rights, and what options I might have. I didn't know where to start, so I typed student loan fraud by parents into Google. The results were both terrifying and oddly comforting. I wasn't alone. There were forums full of stories like mine. It didn't make me feel better, but at least I wasn't the first person to be thrown under the bus by the people who were supposed to care for them. By the time the sun came up, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to let this slide. My parents might have thought they could guilt-trip me into silence, but they underestimated just how determined I could be. The next morning, I called a lawyer. His name was Daniel Shaw, a no-nonsense guy with a gravelly voice and a track record of handling messy family disputes. I explained everything, from the suspiciously high loan amount to the money funneled to Ryan without my consent. Do you have any documentation? He asked after I finished my rant. I think so, I said, racking my brain. Emails, loan statements, maybe some bank records. I just need to dig it all up. Good, Daniel said. Bring everything you've got. This isn't an uncommon situation, but it's tricky. You'll need solid evidence if you want to move forward. I hung up feeling equal parts relieved and terrified. This wasn't just a family argument anymore. It was a legal matter, and I was preparing to go up against my own parents. The next few days were a blur of paperwork and late nights. I dug through every file, every email, every scrap of evidence I could find. The more I uncovered, the worse it got. The loan documents showed my signature in places I didn't remember signing. Bank records revealed transfers I hadn't authorized. But the worst part was realizing just how calculated it all was. My parents had planned this, or at least gone along with it knowing full well what they were doing. And Ryan, he'd just taken the money and spent it without a second thought. I tried not to dwell on the betrayal. It didn't matter how much it hurt. I had to focus on protecting myself. When I finally had everything ready, I called my parents to let them know where things stood. "Mom, Dad," I said over the phone, my voice calm but firm, "we need to talk again. This time, I want you to come to my apartment." My mom hesitated. "Alex, do we really need to drag this out? We can work something out, I'm sure of it." "We're past that," I said, cutting her off. "I've spoken to a lawyer. I'm giving you one last chance to explain yourselves and come up with a plan to fix this before I take legal action." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "Fine," my dad finally said, his tone cold. "We'll be there tonight." They arrived just after dinner, walking into my apartment like they were stepping into enemy territory. My mom looked nervous, clutching her purse like it was a shield. My dad's face was set in a grim scowl. "Let's sit," I said, motioning to the small dining table in the corner of the room. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I've gone through all the loan documents," I began. "I've got proof that you took out more than I needed, proof that the extra money went to Ryan, and proof that you forged my signature on some of the paperwork." My mom's face paled. "Alex, we didn't forge anything. You signed those papers." "I signed them when I was 18, I said, my voice rising. "You told me it was just to handle my tuition. You didn't tell me you were using them to take out extra money for Ryan." My dad leaned forward, his voice sharp. "We didn't forge anything, and we didn't mean for this to happen. You're making a mountain out of a molehill." "A molehill?" I said, my voice shaking with anger. "You put me $135,000 in debt. This isn't a molehill. It's my entire future." My mom tried to interject, her voice trembling. "Alex, we thought we were doing what was best for the family. Ryan needed help, and we didn't have any other options." "You had options," I said, glaring at them. "You could have taken out a loan in his name. You could have talked to me about it. Instead, you decided to gamble my future without even asking me." "We didn't think it would turn out like this," my mom said, tears streaming down her face. "Well, it did," I said, standing up and pacing the room. "And now I'm the one who has to deal with it." The room was silent for a moment. My dad rubbed his temples, and my mom sobbed quietly into her hands. "I'm not paying for Ryan's mistakes," I said finally, my voice steady. "I'm giving you 3 weeks to figure out how to repay the $70,000 you took. If you don't, I'm taking legal action." My dad's head snapped up, his eyes blazing. "You take us to court? Your own parents?" "I don't want to," I said, "but you've left me no choice. This isn't just about money. It's about trust. And right now, I don't trust you to do the right thing unless I force you to." My mom reached out, her voice pleading. "Alex, please. We're your parents. We never wanted to hurt you." "You already have," I said, my voice breaking. "And now it's your turn to fix it." I walked to the door and opened it, signaling that the conversation was over. My parents exchanged a look, then stood and walked out without another word. As the door closed behind them, I leaned against it, my legs shaking. I felt a mix of relief and sadness. Relief because I'd finally stood up for myself. Sadness because I knew, deep down, that nothing would ever be the same. The days following that confrontation felt like I was walking through quicksand. Every step forward seemed like it took twice as much energy as it should. I was drained, emotionally and physically, but there was no room to slow down. If my parents thought I wasn't serious about taking this to court, they were in for a rude awakening. I spent my evenings with my lawyer, Daniel Shaw, sorting through every document, email, and bank statement I could find. Each piece of evidence felt like a brick in a wall I was building, solid, unshakable. It was the only thing that gave me any sense of control in a situation where everything else felt like it was spiraling out of my grasp. 3 weeks came and went with nothing but silence from my parents. No calls, no texts, not even a half-hearted apology. It was like they were waiting for me to blink first. When the deadline I'd given them passed, I scheduled another meeting with Daniel. We sat across from each other in his small, cluttered office downtown. The hum of the old air conditioner filled the silence as I handed him a folder of everything I'd collected. "Looks good," he said, flipping through the pages. "We have a solid case here." Are you sure you want to go through with this? Once we file, there's no going back. I hesitated for only a moment. This wasn't a decision I'd made lightly. They left me no choice, I said. If I let this slide, I'll be stuck with this debt for the rest of my life. They've made it clear they're not going to take responsibility unless I force them to. Daniel nodded and leaned back in his chair. Fair enough. Let's get started. The next day, I officially filed the lawsuit. The paperwork alone felt like a mountain, but with Daniel's guidance, we navigated it all. Once it was done, I felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, anger, and sadness, all jumbled together. It felt surreal. I thought filing the lawsuit would be the hardest part, but I was wrong. The hardest part came after, when word started spreading through the family. It didn't take long for the calls and texts to start rolling in. My mom must have told everyone, because suddenly, I was public enemy number one in the Taylor family. A lawsuit? Against your own parents? My Aunt Linda said over the phone, her tone dripping with disapproval. Family should come first, Alex. This is just wrong. Where was that energy when they dumped 6 figures of debt on me? I shot back. She didn't have an answer for that, and hung up after muttering something about me being selfish. The calls kept coming, some from relatives I hadn't heard from in years. Most of them took my parents' side, accusing me of tearing the family apart. A few cousins reached out to say they understood, but even they sounded hesitant, like they didn't want to get too involved. It was exhausting, and for the first time, I realized just how isolating it was to stand up for myself. I wasn't just fighting my parents anymore. I was fighting an entire network of people who thought I should let it go for the sake of family harmony. The only people who really had my back were my best friend, Sarah, and my girlfriend, Rachel. They listened to my rants, helped me stay focused, and reminded me why I was doing this when the guilt started creeping in. You're doing the right thing, Rachel said one night as we sat on my couch, the TV playing in the background. Just because they're your family doesn't mean they can treat you like this. You deserve better. I wanted to believe her. Some days I did. Other days, I wasn't so sure. A week after filing, my dad finally called. The sound of his name on my phone screen made my stomach churn, but I answered anyway. Alex, he said, his voice tight. We need to talk. We're talking now, I said. Not like this, he snapped. Face to face. Tomorrow. Your mom and I will come to your place. I agreed, though I wasn't sure why. Maybe some part of me still hoped they'd come around, that we could resolve this without it going all the way to court. The next evening, they showed up. My mom looked like she'd been crying for days, her eyes red and puffy. My dad looked furious, his jaw clenched and his fists tight at his sides. They sat across from me at the dining table, the tension in the room thick enough to cut with a knife. You filed a lawsuit against us? My dad started, his voice low but full of anger. I gave you 3 weeks to fix this, I said, keeping my tone steady. You didn't even try. We didn't think you'd actually go through with it, my mom cried. Well, you thought wrong, I said. My dad leaned forward, his glare sharp enough to pierce steel. Do you have any idea what this is doing to your mother? To this family? You're going to ruin everything over a few dollars. A few dollars? I repeated, my voice rising despite my best efforts to stay calm. This isn't pocket change, Dad. It's $135,000. That's more than most people make in a year. And I didn't even spend it. My mom reached across the table, her voice trembling. Alex, please. We'll figure something out. Just drop the lawsuit. Don't do this to us. I pulled back, shaking my head. I already did this. You did this. You put me in this position, and now you're acting like I'm the bad guy for standing up for myself. We didn't mean for it to get this bad, my dad said, his voice softening for the first time. We were just trying to help Ryan. And what about helping me? I asked, my voice breaking. I worked so hard to get through college, to set myself up for a future. Did that not matter to you? My mom started crying again, but I didn't let it sway me. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice firm. I'm willing to settle. If you can repay the $70,000 you took for Ryan and cover the legal fees, I'll drop the lawsuit. Otherwise, we go to court. We don't have that kind of money, my dad said. Then figure it out, I said. Because I'm not backing down. The room fell silent again. My mom sobbed quietly, and my dad stared at me like he didn't recognize me anymore. "We'll talk about it," he said finally, standing up. As they left, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. I hated that it had come to this, but I knew I didn't have a choice. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about standing up for myself, no matter the cost. 2 weeks passed after my parents stormed out of my apartment, and I heard nothing. No calls, no texts, no attempts to negotiate. The silence was deafening, and I wasn't sure if it was a sign of their defiance or desperation. I spent those 2 weeks preparing for court as if my life depended on it. Daniel reassured me that our case was strong. He was confident that the loan documents, bank statements, and records of unauthorized transfers were enough to prove my case. But no amount of confidence could erase the knot in my stomach. My phone finally buzzed on the last day of the 2-week grace period. It was a text from my dad. "We'll meet to talk about settling tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. at Daniel's office." I read the message 3 times, my emotions shifting between relief and wariness. This wasn't over, but at least they were ready to face reality. The next morning, I sat across from my parents in the conference room at Daniel's office. My mom looked worn down, her hands clutching a tissue that was already shredded from nervous twisting. My dad had the same stern, defensive look he always wore when he felt cornered. Daniel opened the meeting with his usual directness. "Mr. and Mrs. Taylor, Alex has given you plenty of opportunities to resolve this matter amicably. Are you prepared to settle today?" My dad glared at him, then at me. "We don't have $70,000 just lying around," he said. "But we've managed to pull some money together." I kept my face neutral, but my heart was racing. "How much?" "We can start with $10,000, my mom said softly, "and we'll pay the rest in installments. Monthly payments." Daniel leaned forward, his expression sharp. "And how long will it take to pay the remaining $60,000? My dad shifted uncomfortably. "We were thinking 10 years. I couldn't stop the bitter laugh that escaped me. 10 years? Are you serious? I'll still be paying off my own debt by then. This isn't some favor you're doing me. This is your responsibility." "Alex, please," my mom said, her voice cracking. "This is the best we can do. We don't have any other options." Daniel held up a hand, stopping me from responding. "Let's be clear about what's on the table. If Alex takes this to court, the amount owed will likely increase to include punitive damages, interest, and legal fees. That will far exceed the $70,000 we're discussing here. Is that a risk you're willing to take?" The room fell silent, and I watched as my dad's jaw clenched. He glanced at my mom, who nodded tearfully. "Fine," he said through gritted teeth. "We'll pay it off in 3 years. Monthly payments, starting with the $10,000 we already have." It wasn't perfect, but it was something. I turned to Daniel, and he nodded. "We'll draft the agreement. If a single payment is missed, we'll proceed with the lawsuit." My parents agreed, though my dad looked like he wanted to punch something. My mom tried to meet my eyes as we left, but I couldn't bring myself to look at her. The relief I felt after the settlement was immediate but hollow. I'd won the battle, but it didn't feel like a victory. The relationship I'd once had with my parents was in tatters, and Ryan hadn't even bothered to show up. The first payment came through a week later. I used it to pay off part of my student loans, chipping away at the mountain of debt that still loomed over me. It was a small step, but it felt good to finally have some control over my finances. Despite the agreement, my parents' payments were a constant source of anxiety. Each month, I waited to see if the money would arrive on time, half expecting them to miss a payment and force me back into legal action. So far, they'd kept their word, but the damage to our relationship was irreversible. Ryan reached out once, a brief text that read, "Sorry things got so bad. Hope we can talk someday." I didn't respond. I wasn't ready to face him, not after everything he'd cost me. Life moved on in small, incremental steps. My internship turned into a full-time job, and I started saving for a fresh start. I dreamed of leaving Phoenix, of finding a new city where I could build a life free from the shadows of my family's betrayal. One day, as I packed up my apartment in preparation for a move to Denver, I found myself holding an old family photo. It was from my high school graduation, the 4 of us smiling in the Arizona sun. My mom's arm was around me. My dad looked proud, and Ryan was making some goofy face. I stared at the picture for a long time, trying to reconcile the people in it with the ones I'd come to know. They weren't villains, not really. They were flawed, selfish, and deeply misguided, but they were still my family. I set the photo aside, unsure if I'd keep it or leave it behind. Some wounds take more than time to heal, and I wasn't ready to forgive them. Not yet. As I closed the box and taped it shut, I felt a strange sense of closure. My life was mine again, free from the weight of their decisions. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I was okay with that. Sometimes, doing the right thing doesn't feel good. It feels like loss, like breaking something you can't fix. But it's also necessary. And as painful as this experience had been, I knew it had taught me something invaluable. I was stronger than I'd ever believed, and I deserved better than what I'd been given. The road ahead was mine to walk, and I was ready to take the first step. My parents told me we were taking a little trip and dumped me for 10 years because of my stepsister sick. When they tried to reconnect, when I was 12 years old, my mom and stepdad sat me down on the couch and told me we were taking a little trip. I didn't know what to expect. I had no reason to. Sure, life in our house was far from perfect, but what kid at 12 thinks their parents are about to abandon them? The memory of that day sticks to me like gum on the bottom of a shoe. Every detail is so vivid it's like my brain refuses to let it go. It was early summer, and the sun was beating down hard when they dropped me off at my biological dad's house. I remember sitting in the back seat of the car, staring out the window, confused. My mom, Emily, kept turning around, flashing me what I now know was a fake, strained smile. "It's only for a little while, Jackson. Your dad will take good care of you," she said. A little while. Those words would echo in my head for years. The thing is, Ryan, my dad, was never a huge part of my life. My parents split when I was really young, and Emily married Ethan when I was about 6. From that point on, everything revolved around Ava. Ava was Ethan's daughter from a previous relationship. She was the golden child. And I was the extra. Ava was sick. Always sick. I'm talking hospital visits, doctors in and out of our house, hushed conversations behind closed doors. No one ever explained what exactly was wrong with her, just that she was fragile and needed peace. If she cried, the house would stop. If she had a fever, Emily would sleep by her bed for nights on end. I tried to understand. I really did. But I was a kid too. And no one slept by my bed when I had nightmares. No one stopped the world when I had the flu. The drop-off was rushed. My stepdad, Ethan, stayed in the car the entire time, fiddling with his phone. My mom got out, walked me to the porch, and hugged me quickly, like she couldn't bear to touch me for too long. "We'll be back soon, baby. I promise," she said. Ryan opened the door, confused, like he didn't even know I was coming. I looked back at my mom, but she was already walking away. She didn't turn around. She just climbed back into the car, and before I could say anything, the car pulled out of the driveway. I stood there on the porch, holding a small duffel bag of clothes and my favorite comic books, feeling hollow. My dad cleared his throat awkwardly. Come on in, Jack. I guess you're staying here now." Living with Ryan wasn't awful, but it wasn't home. He was a mechanic. Hands always greasy, kitchen always smelling like oil and takeout. He wasn't cruel, but he wasn't warm either. He didn't know how to raise a kid. "You need anything? Let me know," he'd mutter as he disappeared into the garage. The first few months, I kept waiting for my mom to call. For Emily to come back and get me. For Ethan to show up with some explanation, like, "Hey buddy, we just needed time to sort things out." But the call never came. And it didn't take long for me to realize that it never would. At 12, I didn't understand why they'd left me. The silence was the worst part. I'd cry myself to sleep some nights, clutching an old family photo like it was some kind of lifeline. My mom's smiling face felt like a stranger's. Ava was in the photo too, sitting in Emily's lap. She looked pale, but happy. I hated that photo. I hated her. And then I hated myself for hating her. Middle school was brutal. I was the quiet kid with secondhand clothes and a permanent chip on my shoulder. I didn't make friends easily. Ryan didn't ask questions, and I didn't tell him anything. By the time I turned 16, I'd built a wall so high around myself that even I couldn't see over it. Ryan and I barely talked. I worked after school at a local burger joint, saving every penny. Ryan didn't ask for rent, but I kept my head down and stayed out of his way. I think he felt guilty, but he didn't know how to say it. At 18, I moved out. Fast forward to now, I'm 22. I have a small apartment, a halfway decent job managing inventory at a warehouse, and my best friend Mason, who's been by my side since high school. Mason's the kind of guy who'll show up at your door with beer and say, "What's up, loser?" just when you need someone most. Life isn't perfect, but it's mine. I've got plans to go back to school part-time. I'm even seeing someone, Olivia. She's smart, funny, and has this way of looking at me like I'm not just some broken puzzle piece that doesn't fit. For the first time, I feel stable. So, when I got a message out of the blue from an unknown number that just said, *Jackson, it's your mom. Can we please talk? It's important. I froze. My mom? My mom, after 10 years of silence. I sat there staring at my phone for what felt like hours. Mason noticed me zoning out. "Dude, you okay?" I showed him the message. He frowned. "What the hell does she want now?" "I don't know," I muttered, fingers hovering over the screen. Part of me wanted to delete the message and pretend it never happened. Another part of me, some stupid, wounded part, felt like that 12-year-old kid again, standing on the porch with a duffel bag. Finally, I typed out a response. What do you want? The reply came almost immediately. It's about Ava. She's very sick. Please, Jackson, just meet with us. Ava. That name punched me in the gut harder than I expected. Mason saw the look on my face. What's going on? I handed him the phone, and he read the message. He let out a low whistle. Man, after 10 years, now they want to talk? That's messed up. I swallowed hard, trying to push down the anger and confusion bubbling in my chest. What did they want? What did she want? And why, after all this time, was Ava suddenly a reason to come crawling back into my life? I don't know what possessed me to agree to meet them. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was some tiny, broken piece of me that still wanted answers. Whatever it was, I found myself sitting in the back corner of a grimy little diner 3 days later, staring at the door like I expected a monster to walk through it. Mason didn't want me to go alone. They don't deserve this meeting, Jack, he'd argued, pacing around my apartment like a lawyer building his case. You owe them nothing. I just want to hear them out, I'd replied, though I wasn't even sure I believed myself. When Emily and Ethan walked into the diner, time stopped. My mom looked older. Her hair had more gray in it than I remembered, and the smile she gave me when she spotted me felt awkward, strained, like she wasn't sure she deserved to smile at all. Ethan trailed behind her, quieter, his eyes avoiding mine. He looked smaller than he used to, like life had folded him in half. I didn't stand up. Jackson, my mom said softly when they reached my table. It's so good to see you. I didn't say anything, just motioned for them to sit. My heart was pounding so hard I thought they'd hear it. For a moment, the three of us sat there in tense silence, the only sound the hum of the old diner lights. Finally, I spoke. What do you want? Emily flinched, but she recovered quickly. We owe you an apology. For everything. An apology? I let out a dry laugh. You dropped me off at Dad's house like I was a stray dog and never came back. 10 years, Mom. 10. You didn't call. You didn't write. You didn't even check if I was alive. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, staring at the chipped tabletop. My mom's hands were trembling. We didn't have a choice, Jackson. You don't understand what it was like. Ava. There it was. That name again. The reason for everything. What about her? She's very sick, Emily said softly, looking up at me with glassy eyes. It's bad this time. The doctors don't think. They don't think she has much longer. For a second, her words hung there like a weight pressing on my chest. I didn't know how to respond. Was I supposed to feel something? Sympathy? Guilt? I felt nothing. So what does that have to do with me? I finally said. Ethan spoke for the first time. We need your help. His voice was low, hesitant. Help? I repeated. My anger flaring. Help with what? You need me to comfort her? Be her long-lost brother? After a decade of nothing, you think I owe you that? Emily shook her head quickly, her face crumbling. No, it's not like that. It's a little more complicated. She didn't explain. She just sat there, eyes pleading, waiting for me to trust her. But I couldn't. Not yet. After what felt like forever, I stood up. If you want something from me, you're going to have to start telling the truth. Until then, I'm done here. Jackson, wait. Emily started, but I was already halfway out the door. As I stepped into the cool evening air, I let out a shaky breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. My mind was racing. Ava was dying. My parents were back. They wanted something from me, and they weren't saying what. I didn't know whether to be angry, sad, or just numb. Maybe all three. That night, Mason came over with a six-pack and bad advice, as usual. So let me get this straight, he said, slumped on my couch, feet on the coffee table. They disappear for a decade, suddenly show up, and now they need your help because Ava's sick again? Yeah. He cracked open a beer and handed it to me. And you didn't ask what kind of help? They wouldn't tell me. Just said it's complicated. Sounds like some manipulative bullshit to me, Mason said bluntly. You're not buying into this, are you? I took a sip of my beer, staring blankly at the wall. I don't know, man. Part of me thinks I should just forget the whole thing. But I don't know. I feel like there's something they're not telling me. Mason snorted. Of course there is. They've been lying to you your whole life. You think they're gonna stop now? The next day, I got another message from my mom. Please, Jackson. If you won't talk to us, can you at least come see Ava? She wants to meet you. She doesn't have much time left. Ava. I'd spent so many years resenting her, blaming her for everything that happened to me. But the truth was, she'd never asked for any of it either. She didn't ask to be sick. She didn't ask to be the center of the universe. And now she was dying. I couldn't ignore that. I didn't tell Mason or Olivia where I was going. I didn't want them to talk me out of it. The hospital was quieter than I expected, all sterile walls and muted voices. When I finally found Ava's room, I stood outside the door for a long time, my hand frozen on the handle. What was I expecting? Some heartfelt reunion? A teary apology? I pushed open the door. Ava was sitting up in bed, staring blankly out the window. Her hair was thin and her face pale, but she still looked vaguely like the girl I remembered from all those years ago. For a moment, I just stood there, unsure what to do. She turned slowly to look at me, her eyes narrowing. Who are you? The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I'm Jackson, I said awkwardly. Your brother. Well, stepbrother, I guess. Ava frowned, like she was trying to piece something together but couldn't. Oh, she finally said. They told me you might come. She didn't sound excited. She didn't sound anything. They said you wanted to see me, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Ava shrugged. Not really. I didn't even know you existed until yesterday. My stomach dropped. What? She turned back toward the window, her voice flat. They never talked about you. Not once. Ava's words knocked the air out of me. They never talked about you. Not once. I didn't even know how to respond. My parents, my mom, had erased me from existence, like I was never there. I stood at the foot of her bed, my hands shaking as I shoved them into my pockets. They never mentioned me? Ava turned back to me, her pale face expressionless, but there was something in her eyes I couldn't quite read. No, I only found out yesterday because Mom was crying about you. She said you wouldn't come. Crying? My voice cracked with disbelief. That's rich. She tilted her head slightly, studying me like I was some unsolvable puzzle. Why are you even here? They said you didn't want anything to do with us. I don't. The words came out sharper than I intended. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to calm down. Look, I didn't come here for them. I came here because they said you wanted to see me. Well, I didn't. There it was. Plain and simple. Ava looked out the window again, clearly done with me. I stood there for a moment, feeling like the world's biggest idiot. I don't know what I was expecting. Some sort of bond, maybe, like we'd find some connection hidden under the ruins of our screwed-up family. But I was wrong. Ava was just as much a stranger to me as I was to her. I turned to leave, muttering, "Goodbye, Ava." "Wait," she said suddenly, her voice softer. I froze, glancing back at her. "Why did they leave you?" The question hit me harder than I expected. I swallowed, my throat tight. "I don't know. You'll have to ask them." I didn't hear from my mom or Ethan for a couple of days after that, and I didn't care. I buried myself in work, trying to forget about the whole mess. But Mason knew something was off the minute he saw me. "You look like hell," he said, dropping into the chair across from me at the diner where I grabbed lunch sometimes. "What happened?" "They never told her about me," I muttered, stirring my coffee. "Ava. She didn't even know I existed until 2 days ago." Mason blinked. "Wait, what?" I nodded, staring blankly at the tabletop. "They erased me, man. For 10 years, I was dead to them." Ava didn't even know she had a stepbrother. Mason let out a low whistle, shaking his head. "Dude, this is messed up. Like, next level messed up. What's their deal?" "I don't know, but something's off. There's more they're not telling me." "You think they're lying about Ava being sick?" I hesitated. "No. She looked bad. Really bad. But there's something else. I can feel it." Mason leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Then find out. If they want you involved, make them tell you everything." That night, I caved and texted my mom. "Meet me tomorrow. I want the truth." She replied almost instantly. "Of course. Thank you, Jackson. We'll explain everything." The next day, I met them again, this time at a park. I chose a public place on purpose. I didn't trust them enough to be alone with them. They were already sitting on a bench when I arrived, looking as nervous as teenagers caught sneaking out. I didn't sit. I just stood in front of them, arms crossed. "Start talking. All of it." Emily opened her mouth, but Ethan beat her to it. "We messed up, Jackson. We know that. But Ava's illness, it was too much. The doctors, the hospital bills. It drained everything we had." I didn't say anything. I just stared at them, waiting for the real truth. Emily took a shaky breath. "After we left you, my father, your grandfather, passed away. He left us some money. Enough to help Ava for a while." Something about the way she said it made my skin crawl. "What does this have to do with me?" Emily flinched again. "We had to make choices, Jackson. You have to understand. Ava was so sick, and the money. My blood ran cold." "You mean the inheritance?" She nodded silently. "And you spent it all on her." Ethan finally looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and tired. "We didn't have a choice. She needed treatments. Experimental stuff. It was her only chance." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. My grandfather, the man who used to take me fishing and tell me stories, had left me something, and they'd taken it. They'd spent it all. On Ava. I took a step back, my hands balling into fists. "So, let me get this straight. You abandoned me, erased me from your lives, stole my inheritance, and now, after 10 years, you come crawling back because you need more?" "It's not like that," Emily pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "We thought we were doing what was best. Ava needed us. And I didn't." My voice cracked. I could feel the anger bubbling up in my chest, years of resentment and hurt threatening to explode. "I was 12, Mom. You didn't even look back when you drove away." Ethan looked down again, like he couldn't bear to meet my eyes. "We're sorry, Jackson. We are. But Ava's dying. She needs a bone marrow transplant, and you're her only match." The world tilted. "What?" Emily reached out, but I stepped back again. "Please, Jackson. We wouldn't have come to you if it wasn't life or death. You're her only chance." I stared at them, my heart pounding in my chest. "You abandoned me, stole from me, and now you want my bone marrow?" Neither of them said a word. I turned and walked away, their voices calling after me, but I didn't look back. When I got home, I slammed the door and sank to the floor, my head in my hands. They wanted this from me? After everything? Mason showed up later, uninvited as usual, and found me sitting on the couch, still in shock. "Jack? What happened?" I told him everything. About the inheritance. About the transplant. About the truth I'd finally dragged out of them. Jesus, Mason muttered, running a hand through his hair. So they stole your money, abandoned you, and now they want to take more from you? And for what? A girl who didn't even know you existed. She's dying, Mason, I said quietly. I don't know what to do. Yeah? Well, where were they when you needed saving? I didn't answer. I just sat there, staring at the floor, wondering how the hell I was supposed to make this choice. I barely slept that night. The words, bone marrow transplant, replayed in my head like a broken record. Every time I thought about it, a mix of anger and guilt clawed at my chest. They abandoned me. They stole from me. And now they wanted to take more, asterisk asterisk. Mason was still pissed the next day. You're not seriously considering it, are you? He asked as he scarfed down a bagel at my kitchen table. I shrugged. I don't know, man. She's dying. She didn't ask for any of this either. Mason slammed his hand on the table, making me jump. No, I'm not letting you do this. They're manipulating you, Jack. That's what they do. They don't deserve your bone marrow, your time, or even your pity. I knew he was right. But the guilt, that was harder to ignore. Over the next few days, my mom kept texting me. Please, Jackson. Ava's getting worse. She needs you. I tried to block it out. I buried myself in work, spent time with Olivia, anything to stop myself from spiraling. But it didn't help. Ava's pale face kept haunting me, and the weight of my decision pressed heavier on me each day. Finally, Olivia noticed something was wrong. You've been off lately, she said one night as we sat on her couch. What's going on, Jack? I hesitated, but I trusted her. So I told her everything. About my parents. About Ava. About the transplant. She listened quietly, her expression unreadable. When I was done, she said softly, Jack, you don't owe them anything. Not after what they did to you. I know, I said. But Ava. She's innocent in all of this. She may be innocent, but your parents aren't, Olivia replied firmly. Think about what they're really asking of you. Do you trust them? That question stuck with me. Did I trust them? No, not even a little. The next day, I decided I needed answers. Real answers. If I was going to make a decision, I had to know the full truth. So I went to the hospital to see Ava again. When I walked into her room, she looked up at me with tired eyes. You came back, she said flatly. Yeah, I muttered, sitting in the chair by her bed. I need to ask you something, she sighed, turning to face me. What? Do you know everything? About me? About why they left me? Ava's brows furrowed. No. Mom and Ethan just said you left because you didn't care about us. That's what they always told me. I froze, my blood turning to ice. What? They said you didn't want to deal with me being sick. That you were selfish. She looked away, her voice barely above a whisper. I guess I believed it. Why wouldn't I? You were just gone. My hands curled into fists. I felt like the world was spinning out of control. That's not true, I said, my voice shaking. They abandoned me, Ava. They dropped me off at my dad's house and never came back. I was 12. She looked back at me, her eyes widening. They never said that. Of course they didn't, I snapped. They lied to you. Just like they lied to me. Ava stared at me for a long moment, processing what I just said. Why would they do that? I leaned back, running a hand through my hair. Because they're selfish. Because they didn't want to take care of both of us. I was disposable. Ava swallowed hard, looking down at her hands. I didn't know. On my way out of the hospital, I ran into Grace, a family friend who had helped care for Ava over the years. I remembered her from when I was a kid. She was always around, babysitting or dropping off casseroles when Ava was in the hospital. Jackson, she said, surprised. I thought that was you. Hey, Grace, I muttered. She smiled sadly. It's good to see you again. I'm glad you're reconnecting with the family. I let out a bitter laugh. Reconnecting? Not exactly. She frowned. Well, at least you're here for Ava. I always thought it was wrong what they did. I froze. What do you mean? Her expression shifted, like she'd said something she wasn't supposed to. Nothing. Forget it. No, Grace. Tell me. She hesitated, looking around nervously. Finally, she sighed. When they sent you away, it wasn't just because of Ava. They didn't want you to know about the money. About the inheritance. My stomach dropped. What? Your grandfather left you a good amount of money, Jackson. Enough to help you go to college, get a fresh start. But Emily and Ethan took it. They used it for themselves, not just Ava. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. Are you sure? Grace nodded, looking at me with pity. I'm so sorry, Jackson. I thought you knew. I didn't know what to say. I stumbled out of the hospital, my mind spinning. All this time, I thought they'd spent everything on Ava's treatments. But they hadn't. They'd spent my money on themselves. When I got home, Mason was waiting for me. He took one look at my face and said, "What happened?" "They stole everything," I whispered. "It wasn't just for Ava. They took my money and used it on themselves." Mason's face darkened. I knew it. Those bastards. What are you gonna do? I didn't answer. I just sat down on the couch, my mind racing. My parents had lied to me for 10 years. They'd stolen from me, abandoned me, and then had the audacity to ask for my bone marrow like I owed them something. Well, I didn't owe them a damn thing. The next day, my mom called me again. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail, her voice shaking. "Jackson, please. Ava's getting worse. We need you. She needs you. Don't let her die." I deleted the message. For the first time in my life, I felt completely free. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel obligated. I felt done. I ignored my mom's messages for a week. I didn't respond to her texts, her calls, or the guilt-ridden voicemails she left daily. Each one sounded more desperate than the last, but I couldn't bring myself to care. Not anymore. Mason was right. Asterisk asterisk they were manipulators. Asterisk asterisk they'd always been. For years, they twisted reality to suit themselves, painting me as the selfish one while they drained my inheritance and erased me from their lives. Now they were trying to use Ava's illness to squeeze the last bit of humanity out of me. But I was done being their puppet. It wasn't easy, though. The guilt clung to me, whispering in the back of my mind like a voice I couldn't drown out. What about Ava? She was dying, and no matter how much I resented my parents, it wasn't her fault. The problem was, I didn't trust them. Not one bit. Mason tried to talk me down one night while we sat in my apartment eating takeout. "Jack, you don't owe them a thing. Bone marrow transplant or not, they threw you away. Now they're pulling every string they can because they know you're a good person." I scoffed, shoving a forkful of cold noodles into my mouth. Am I? A good person wouldn't let a sick girl die. Mason leaned forward, his expression dead serious. "Don't let them make you responsible for her life. That's on them, not you." The next morning, I woke up to another message. But this one wasn't from my mom. It was from Grace. Asterisk Jackson, I don't know if you're aware, but Ava's back in the hospital. Things are worse. I thought you should know. Asterisk. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone clutched in my hand. A part of me wanted to block the number, to bury myself in work and forget everything. But another part, some small, stubborn part, couldn't let it go. Ava didn't ask for this. She was sick. She was dying. And she'd never gotten a chance to know the truth. Maybe I couldn't save her, but I could tell her the truth about everything. I drove to the hospital that afternoon. My palms were sweating the entire way, and I couldn't shake the nerves that gripped me like a vice. What was I doing? Why was I here? When I walked into Ava's room, it felt like stepping into another world. Machines beeped softly around her, and she looked even frilier than before. Her skin was almost translucent, and her eyes were sunken, dark circles beneath them. She looked up slowly when I walked in. "You came back." "Yeah," I said quietly, pulling up a chair beside her bed. There was a long silence between us, broken only by the hum of machines. Finally, I spoke. "I need to tell you something. The truth." Ava blinked at me, her tired eyes searching mine. "What truth?" I hesitated, but I knew she deserved it. "About why I left. About why you didn't know I existed." She shifted slightly, wincing as she moved. "Okay." I took a deep breath, then told her everything. About how our parents abandoned me. About how they stole my inheritance. About how they lied to both of us for 10 years. Ava didn't say anything at first. She just stared at me, her face pale and unreadable. Then she whispered, "They told me you left because you hated me." Because I was sick. My heart clenched. That's not true. None of that is true. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she didn't cry. She just nodded, swallowing hard. I believe you. I stayed with Ava for hours that day, talking quietly. She didn't have much energy, but she listened as I told her about my life, about growing up with our dad, about how I'd felt when they left me. I didn't sugarcoat anything. I resented you for years, I admitted. I blamed you for everything, but it wasn't your fault. It was theirs. Ava nodded slowly. I always knew they were lying. I just didn't want to believe it. There was a long pause. She turned her head to look at me, her voice weak. Are you going to do it? The transplant? I looked at her for a long moment, searching her face. Do you want me to? She shrugged slightly. I don't know. I don't want to die, but I don't want you to do something you don't want to do. Her honesty hit me harder than I expected. I didn't answer her. I just squeezed her hand gently and told her to rest. I spent the next 2 days thinking. I avoided my mom and Ethan's calls. I even ignored Mason when he showed up at my door. I needed space. I needed to decide. Could I live with myself if I let Ava die? Could I live with myself if I gave in to my parents' manipulation again? On the third day, I made my decision. I walked into the hospital, straight past my mom and Ethan, who were waiting in the lobby. My mom jumped up when she saw me. Jackson. Oh, thank God. Save it. I snapped. I'm not here for you. I left her standing there, stunned, and walked into Ava's room. She looked up at me, surprised. You came back. Yeah, I said softly. I came to tell you that I'm not going to do the transplant. Ava blinked, her face falling. Oh. I sat down beside her, my voice calm but firm. It's not because I don't care about you. It's because I can't let them keep using me. They've taken everything from me, Ava. I can't give them this too. She nodded slowly, tears welling up in her eyes. I understand. I wish things were different, I said quietly. But they're not. Ava gave me a weak smile. Thank you for telling me the truth, Jackson. You're the only one who ever did. I left the hospital that day feeling lighter than I had in years. My mom tried to call after me as I walked through the lobby, but I didn't stop. I didn't look back. For the first time in my life, I was free. Over the next few weeks, I focused on rebuilding my life. I spent more time with Mason and Olivia, and I finally started taking classes at the local college like I'd always planned. Ava passed away a month later. Grace called me to let me know. She said Ava had made peace with everything before the end. She said you were the only family she ever trusted, Grace told me. I hung up the phone and cried. Not for my parents, not for myself, but for Ava, who never got the chance to live the life she deserved. I didn't go to the funeral. I heard my parents moved out of state afterward. I never spoke to them again. Some people might say I was selfish, but I don't see it that way. I chose myself for the first time in my life. I chose to stop letting them manipulate me. And in the end, I think Ava understood that. I still think about her sometimes. About what might have been if we'd grown up together, if things had been different. But I can't change the past. All I can do is keep moving forward.